Hi, this is Russ Bucher from ControlMyNikon. In this video, we're going to take a look at how to use Live View within ControlMyNikon. And Live View is one of the central features of ControlMyNikon, and it makes it real easy to visualize what your exposure and composition is going to be before you take the shot, and it could save you a lot of time. Let's take a look first of all how to get into Live View. Now only certain cameras have the ability to have Live View. For example, a D40 can't do Live View at all. So if you were connected to a D40, you would not see this Live View button. But I'm connected to a D7000 here, so we do have Live View and the button is visible. If you want to connect to Live View, all I need to do is click on the Live View button and it brings up the screen. And if you want to close Live View, you can just hit the button again. To open it, just click on the button. You can also use this button way up here in the upper right hand corner to close the window, and it does the same thing. So let's click on Live View. Now we can reposition this anywhere we like. We can make it full screen. We can make it quite small. It really depends how much real estate you have. You know, if you're using a netbook, you can bring it down to a size as small as this. But I'm going to bring it back to this size right here. Okay, so let's take a look at the different parts of the Live View screen. First of all, we have the toolbar up here, and on these buttons here, this is the Show Settings panel button. And when you click on it, it just brings up this panel, and this panel allows us to make some changes to the different data layers of the Live View image. I'm just going to turn that off for now. And this button here allows us to hide any of those layers. So if I click on this, it takes them all off. And sometimes you can get a lot of data layers active and it's tough to see the image, so you can use this to toggle it on and off. And you can use this button here to fit the window. Currently it is fit the window because the button is pressed down, but if I bring this button up, now I can drag this image. I could zoom in and out using the mouse wheel. And if I want to fit it back to the window again, I can just click here and it fits back in. These are the zoom buttons, so if I click on this, you can zoom in. Now this isn't zooming in just on the image that the camera has sent you. This is the actual body zooming in on the image as it's captured on the sensor. So on the Nikon D7000, this image is roughly, 4,000 by 3,000. And right now we are zooming in on part of that 4,000 by 3,000 image. I'm going to zoom out. Now the difference between zooming in with those two buttons up there and using the mouse to zoom in is when I use the mouse, I'm only zooming in on the reduced size image that is sent to ControlMyNikon by the body. And the body only sends a 640 by 426 image. And you can see now when I zoom in on this image, just like zooming in on something in Photoshop, it gets pixelated. And if you look closely here, you could see the effects of this pixelation and also of the JPEG compression. Now this image that is sent is not very high quality, but it's really all we have to work with within ControlMyNikon, and it allows us really to get a sense of what the composition and the exposure is going to be. Okay, next button is for autofocusing, and that's what this box is for here. When this box is red, that means that ControlMyNikon is not too sure whether it is in focus or not, because we haven't attempted to focus yet. So I'm going to click here. Now this focusing is done internally by the body, and it's a contrast focus. In other words, in this square, it's looking for an area of maximum contrast. It'll move the focus back and forth to get the maximum. So you have to have good lighting and good contrast for it to work. Let's try taking a focus over here and see how well it works. So I'm going to focus, and there's some writing in the background there. And it finds that. It's a focus chart. Let's try it over here. And here picked up something more in the foreground. And over here, picks up that in the background. Now, if I look in the middle here, there's a very narrow post. This is where the focusing gets tricky because the camera's not too sure what you want it to focus on. It's just thinking about trying to focus on something that's in that box. And as far as it's concerned, it finds something of the maximum contrast way in the background here, and it only has moved the focus a little bit to try and find it. So sometimes you need to give it a little hand. So I'm going to do this manually, and you could bring the focus forward, or you could use the focus pad. We'll look at how that is done in a moment. So there's that foreground piece. Now, if I attempt to focus here, it sees that it's already near something of high contrast, so it stays there. It's not uncommon for the focus to hunt back and forth trying to find something that is in contrast. So again, for maximum success by using the contrast AF, you need good lighting and good contrast. Now the next buttons up here are for the remote monitor. Now this allows you to get another live view screen. And this can be used when you're doing commercial shoots. Maybe you have clients over and they want to see what your shot's going to look like before you take it, so you could compose it by using live view and maybe move this window to another monitor and let them look at it there, so they don't have to look at your compositional lines and focus boxes and maybe exposure markers that you have set up. So this really comes in handy to let clients, maybe even models, see what their composition looks like. I'll just close that. Now this button up here appears only if you have a Nikon D5100 or a D7000, a D800, D800E, or a D4. And those cameras can be used to do tethered video recording. If you want to record video, you just click here. And when you want to stop, you click here again, and then it'll transfer your video. And we have a separate video tutorial on capturing video. So that's it for the toolbar here. Let's see what else we could do. And most of the other functionality here is in the settings panel. So this image here is going to rotate when you rotate your camera. So I'm going to grab my camera here and rotate it 90 degrees to the right. And you can see it's used the orientation information coming from the camera body to tell us that we need to flip this image. And it'll do that all the way around. I'll just move this to bring it back and then autofocus it. Okay, we could control the background color here. By default, I have it as transparent, but you can just move the slider here to give it a different color. And I'm going to leave that as transparent. Now for the image, for the rotation there, I told it to use the auto setting. However, you could force it to be a different orientation. You could say keep it level no matter what I do, or counterclockwise or clockwise, or just invert it completely. Now this is useful when you're using a copy stand. And quite often you'll set up your camera on a copy stand, and because the camera is pointed perfectly down, it confuses the sensor in the body a little bit, and it'll start telling you that your image has been rotated. So this allows you to override whatever orientation information that the camera is sending you. Now you can also crop it. If you intend to crop this image later, say 16 by 9 in post-processing, this is what it would look like. It's not actually cropping the image for you here, only cropping the presentation of the image on the screen. So I'll leave that for auto, since that's something you more likely use during video shooting. Now with your image here also, you could change the opacity, and you could change the scale. This is the same as using the mouse wheel. And I'll put it back to fit the window. Now, the reason you might want to use a change of opacity here, or even to convert it to grayscale, and it's not very colorful, so I'll turn on a little bit of color. The reason you might want to turn it to grayscale here is it makes it easier to see some of the overlay data that we're going to look at here in a moment. But I'll just leave this off, leave it maximum opacity. You can even disable the image completely, and it just leaves the boundary here of where the image is going to be. And that's useful later on when you do something like this. It allows you to see the exposure selection areas very easily. Okay, I'm just going to re-enable this. Oh, we could turn our grid on and off. Now your grid, you could change the opacity of your grid as well, so we can make it very transparent here. You could change the color. Sometimes you're shooting a scene where a black grid just kind of fades into whatever the scene is. So we just set it to whatever color you like. I'll just leave it here as black and turn down the opacity a bit. Now you can control the number of lines. And I'll bring it back here for rule of thirds. Now these sliders here you could use with a mouse, or you can just click on them and then use the keyboard to change the setting, or you can just type in the number here. So I'll leave my grid on. Now we also have a focus box. So here it's currently green because the body thinks that is currently in focus. So I'm going to turn the focus box off. Now that area is still there. If I attempt to autofocus, it's going to do that. If I attempt to zoom, it's going to zoom in on that spot as well. So that focus box really isn't just for focusing. It's really the action area where the camera is going to attempt to autofocus or zoom. I will just leave that on for now. You can also change the opacity here. We also have the focus pad. And what we can do here is to set the opacity, set the color of the crosshairs, and then using your left mouse button, you just hold your left mouse button down, drag it from left to right, and it adjusts the focus. Now it'll adjust the focus on a camera that is using a CPU controlled lens. So a full manual lens is not going to work. You need to ensure that you have autofocus enabled on the lens and on the body. So if you move the mouse upwards, you can see this number here decreases. That's called your step size. And that means that with a step size of 20, now if I move to the left, it changes my focus by 20 at a time. If I move to the right, it changes to 20 at a time. Now you can make much larger steps down here. This is a step of approximately 600, so I just have to move my mouse a little bit to get a large change. So after a while you get used to using this and you know how much you want to move your focus. Now if you're attempting to set your focus and you've dragged, let's say all the way to the left, let's say I'm trying to get this in focus, but I haven't achieved focus yet, you just release your mouse button, go back to this side here, hold your mouse button down, and just kind of stroke it back in this direction. Now an easier way to do this is to use a keyboard shortcut, and we have a tutorial video on using keyboard shortcuts and how you could set it up to finely tune your focus. Okay, I'm just going to turn off the focus pad and let's take a look at edges. Now this is another way to see what's in focus, and currently the edges are outlined in blue, but because I already have some blue in the scene here, I'm going to change this color to something else. Let's make it yellow. So this is an easy way to tell what is in focus. It's a very rough approximation though. It's mainly used in video when you're doing focus pulling, so you can see at a distance when you're manually changing the focus what is currently in focus. So I'm just going to move the focus now on the camera, and we're going to see where the edges go. So the foreground to the background and back to the foreground. So this really gives you an approximation, and you could change the opacity of this as well. And as we saw, the color. Now you can also change the threshold and the bias. So it's really the sensitivity of edge detection. And here you can see that it's not sensitive enough. I'll bring it up a bit. Change the bias a little just to tweak it and get it as accurate as possible. So it's just another tool to help you achieve focus. Okay, let's turn this off. The next thing to take a look at is the message. Now, when we take a shot, if you look in the upper left-hand corner here, you can see you get a message. Now, we could change the color and the opacity of that. So let's say I want it to be very dark and have a green text instead. We could do that. So now when I take my shot, it's that same opacity and color that you just set. So a lot of customization here just to make it easier to read, easier to use the live view. Now let's take a look at some of the different histogram related things in live view. Using the live view histogram and the inner and outer exposure markers are a great way to preview what your exposure is going to be on your image. Now, only some cameras truly support this. The D5100 and the 7000, the D800 and D800E and the D4 all allow live histogram information to be displayed. If you had an older camera that has live view, say a D300, what would happen under Nikon's older way of handling live view is that it would enable auto ISO. And even if you have a very dark scene, it would crank up the ISO so it would become visible. It would just look very noisy. But because of that, we couldn't do a live histogram or display of any kind of live exposure data. So this is only valid on certain bodies. But if you have one of those cameras, this is what you can do with this. First of all, let's go back to the exposure inner. We looked at this a little earlier. Now, if you enable it, it shows you the areas of the image that are currently between a luminance value of 85 and 165. And values here on the histogram can go between 0 and 255. So really this is a mid-range. I'm going to just tighten it up a little bit here. And this is useful if you're attempting to get an area of your image, such as a person's face, in a certain range of luminance. You can also use the red channel and the green channel and the blue channel. Let's bring it back to luminance. And you can change the opacity and you could change the color. I'm just going to leave it though as green, because green is good. Okay, I'm just going to leave that there. An outer exposure shows you the areas of exposure that are outside of certain values. So here I want to see everything 10 and below and 245 and above. So really I'm asking it to show me anything that's really dark or really bright. That means these areas don't have a lot of room to move. I attempt to change the exposure or the brightness of this image in post-processing. And you could tighten it up even more. You could just say, show me everything that's completely blown out black and completely blown out white. So there's some sparkly areas here in the black that are just absolute black and could not be darker in post-processing. These areas here, which are really reflections of the lighting that we have on this radiometer, are just blown out white, so you can't make it any brighter. So you can use this as a guide to show you when your exposure is getting close to the edge. And sometimes it's okay to have your exposure too dark or too light. It depends on what you're trying to achieve with your image. Now, if I turn these both on, it shows you the acceptable range and the range that you may want to be concerned about here in the red. Now, sometimes this can be a little confusing and difficult to see, so what you can do is go back to image here and you can turn the image off completely. Or go back to the image, turn it to grayscale. And you can go and turn down the opacity just to make it a little bit easier to see. So there's a lot of opportunity here using these tools to fine-tune that exposure before you take the shot. And where this really shines is taking shots of a scene just like this, where you have highlights and you have a lot of darks like this, and it's tough to get the lighting position just perfectly. So you can just turn this on and start adjusting your lighting to get your exposure just right. Shooting anything shiny like this, like coins or minerals or jewelry, really benefits from using this kind of workflow. Okay, I'm going to turn this off. And let's take a look at some other things that we can do within Live View. I'm going to bring this back into focus. All right, let's take a look at focus stacking. So focus stacking allows you to take a series of images of shallow depth of field and combine them to make an image with a very large depth of field. Very useful in macro work. Now this image I have here really isn't appropriate for it because it has movement, but I'll just briefly demonstrate the concept. We have another video that shows you in depth how to use focus stacking. So I'm going to use my focus pad here just to tweak my focus. You notice I have a step of 39. I'm just going to put this here, 39. And then I'll hit preview. And you're going to notice it's going to take 3 slices in preview, and it is going to step through different focus. So preview, 1, 2, 3. See how your focus changed when that happened? Let's try it again. 1, 2, 3. So your focus changed throughout that series. When we're satisfied that the preview is correct, we hit the capture button here, and it's going to capture that series of images, and then you can export it to an application such as Zareen Stacker that's going to combine all those images together, and give you excellent depth of field. This is how you see some of those really nice flower or insect pictures of incredible detail are usually done with focus stacking. Now let's take a look at the histogram. Now the histogram, when I enable it, this puts a histogram on the bottom of the screen here. If you hold your mouse somewhere over the image, it will show you where in the histogram the pixel is under the cursor. So here I'm on a very bright area here, and you'll see that there's vertical lines will appear in these graphs. I'll hold it under a bright area such as this. The bar will be far to the right because it's very bright. It has a very high luminance. And this is luminance, red, green, and blue channel. If I go an area here, which is continuously dark, the vertical bars will be to the left. So this allows you to explore your image and see where certain areas are showing up in your histogram. You'll see these little squares here on your histogram. These are very important. And what they mean is that if you see a square here, that means it's been blown out dark on the luminance histogram. You can see it very close to the edge, and it just takes 1 pixel to blow it out. If you were to scale this down very small, it's very easy to see the edges of the histogram to tell if anything's blown out at all. So those little dots will be there to tell you that it's reached its limit. And here, there's at least 1 pixel that's blowing out here. Same on the red channel, green channel, blue channel. It sometimes is blown out. You can see it flickers. So this gives you a bit of a guide to allow you to determine if you've blown anything out on your histogram. And you can use this in combination with your inner and outer exposure markers to get a real representation of what your exposure is on your image. Okay, I'll close the histogram. And let's take a look at our newest feature, and that's the motion trigger. Now the motion trigger allows you to trigger the shutter or run a script or record video based on motion that's detected here. So to be able to set that up, you just click on Enabled and click on, first of all here, change the threshold here so we could see some movement. We change the dot size. The dot size can be very small or a little bit bigger. The dot size is important because it's used to reject noise in your image. And if you were to go up here, I'm going to go up to the very top and zoom in on it. If you look at the image here, you'll see a little bit of noise. You see a little bit of granularity happening here. You may notice that there's a little bit of distortion around the edge here. And that type of thing can be picked up by ControlMyNikon as movement because really the pixels are changing in that area. So by increasing the dot size, you reduce that effect and you make ControlMyNikon reject that noise. So here I'm going to increase a little bit. If it's too small, you'll see you get it showing up all over the place. Increase my dot size. And you can also increase the threshold. So this allows you to tune out any noise or any movement that you don't want. If you bring your threshold down too far, it picks up on all sorts of things. Even this over here, I mean, this isn't moving at all. This is just the edge of the bulb. But it's picking up noise here and saying that it's movement. So let's increase the threshold. Okay, now this could be used to detect the movement of a bird at a bird feeder, or maybe a person doing something, or a dog jumping, or a skateboarder jumping, or whatever you like. All you need to do is set it up to detect movement, and then draw a target. So let's say I want to trip the shutter anytime I notice movement in this area here. Okay, just click on Edit, and then left click, left click, left click, and you're basically drawing a target here. Now, if you want to get rid of this target, you just right click, or if you want to get rid of the target, you just click on the clear button here, and when you're done editing, you click on the edit button again, and that's your target. So I want a better target here. I'm going to right click to clear it. I want any movement up here. Okay, the target has been drawn. Now you see occasionally here that it detects this as movement down here, but that's okay because we won't trigger on that because this is not included in the target. Okay, now let's tell it to shoot whenever it detects movement in the target. And now we need to tell it to trigger based on the amount of dots that are visible in the target. So it starts at 99. I'm going to bring it down to 1, which means that we're going to trigger the shutter if we detect at least 1 dot in this target at any given time. And that's almost all the time right now. You may see it flicker a little bit here. It's just out of luck. It will not have any dots visible at all. Let's increase it a little bit more here. If it needs 8, you see it's flickering on and off because it doesn't always have at least 8. But that's really okay in this case here because we just need enough to trigger it. So what we can do here is also increase the reset because I don't want it continuously shooting here. I want it to take a shot and then rest 10 seconds before it attempts to do it again. So I'll enable it and it detects it. It's capturing the image. It's transferred the image. Now it turns gray, which means that it's resetting. Give it a little bit of time, and it's going to take another shot. So let's just wait. And there it goes. Now there's some different variations you can do on this. You could tell it to run a script, or you could tell it to record a video. So here, when you click on it, it says, how many seconds of the video would you like? We'll say record a 5-second video. I'll increase my reset time a little bit more. Let's make it 20 seconds. So now we'll say, any time that it triggers, start recording a video. Okay, enable it. And here it has started recording. It's recorded for 5 seconds and then transfer the video back to the computer. Okay, so now it's transferred back. It's done. It's turned gray because it's resetting. It's going to wait 20 seconds. And then it's going to start recording again. And we'll just wait. There it goes. And it's done. So you can fine tune this area. I'm going to clear the target and say that, let's say we only want it to trigger based on this area here. Okay, I'll decrease this. Now there isn't many dots in there. They only occur every now and then, but we have enough to at least trigger it. So I'll set it up to record video. There it goes. And it's done, and it's resetting. So you can get very creative with the motion trigger, and it provides a lot of opportunities to very inexpensively trigger the shutter and capture potentially some great action shots. You can use this also with the continuous feature in ControlMyNikon to capture a series of images very rapidly. If you intend to use rapid capture by using continuous shooting, there's a bit of a trick that you need to be aware of, and that is concerning the focus. The way Nikon has implemented the tethered shooting means that if you're in live view, when you take your first shot under continuous shooting mode, the first shot will use whatever focus that you already had set up in live view. And then the next shot is going to use phase autofocus. It's going to attempt to focus exactly where you left the phase autofocus target box in your viewfinder. Now you can get around that by putting that box in the same spot that you want to take your shot. So put it in the same place as a contrast AF here, or you could put it here, or you could just turn the autofocus switch off on your lens or the body. And so when it takes a shot, it's not going to attempt to change the focus from whatever you set in contrast AF here at the beginning. And this is great if you're taking pictures of anything with a lot of action. You can rattle off a lot of images in a hurry and get that focus just perfect. And we have some other options here that we can set in the preferences screen that have to do with live view. I'll just turn the motion trigger off. And I'll return this to its regular size. Go to Preferences, and under the Live View. Now, for some computers, such as Windows 7 tablets, if you were to just try to double-click here, it won't move the focus box. On non-tablet computers, it will. It's no problem. You just double-click and it moves. So you can get around that by putting a check mark here, closing this, and now it just takes a single click to move. So you can just touch the screen and it moves this box. Now, when Live View is active, it only stays active for so long. And here on a D7000, it can stay up for 30 minutes, and then Nikon determines that the sensor has been on long enough and that the image could degrade due to sensor overheating, and shuts it down. Now you can have it automatically start back up after a little while by just putting this check mark here and setting a second delay. So here I have it set that if it shuts down, it'll bring it back up within 5 seconds. That's useful if you have something like a motion trigger set up and you're going to be waiting for hours for the event to occur that you want to capture. You need to set this up, and so after your Live View deactivates, it'll come back up automatically. You can also set the timing for the closing and opening of Live View. Now, some cameras are a bit more sensitive than others on this, and for example, if you were doing focus stacking or taking shots here, it actually has to close down Live View. It doesn't close the window, but it disables Live View internally. It takes a shot and it brings Live View back up. And by default, it has a certain amount of time it spends bringing it back up and shutting it down. Some cameras need a little bit more or less. By default here, it's going to wait 2 seconds, but you can increase this if needed if you're dealing with older cameras or cameras that just have problems bringing Live View up and down. And you can tell it'll have a problem because you'll go to take a shot and it might gray these buttons out and they won't come back. It's just happening too fast, and that'll most likely turn up in focus stacking. So what you can do then is just go here and increase this maybe to 3,000 or 4,000 milliseconds. Now the performance that you get here during Live View varies on the computer. This is a very high speed computer I have. It's a quad core 16 gig machine, so you get the easy 24 frames a second from your body, and your Nikon body is trying to send you 24 frames of images per second, and these images are JPEGs of 640 by 426 and kind of a normal quality. So you need a good fast computer to be able to process that properly. If this was a slow Atom netbook, you would not be getting this kind of display. It would look kind of choppy. You might only get 10 frames per second here. So if you're ever out shopping for a tablet or a notebook or something to run ControlMyNikon, try to find something with a faster CPU, and definitely get something with an Intel CPU. It really does make a difference because the image decoding that we use here depends heavily on the high-speed performance of Intel CPUs. The AMD CPUs just don't seem to cut it, and they're a lot slower. They're cheaper, but you'll definitely notice it in this kind of choppy performance. We can also set an overlay, and this is very useful for setting up customized compositional lines. So all you need to do is just set your overlay to a PNG image, and it's overlaid on top of this. It needs to be the same dimensions as the Live View image. That's it. That's how you use Live View in ControlMyNikon. Happy tethering.